JLR investigates. The Gods Misfits are back in the news, folks. And there is some new shocking details on what they did in reference to this terrible crime in the panhandle of Oklahoma. 2 innocent people were brutally murdered. And we got some details, folks. We're going to talk about Tad Cullum and Paul Grice. These 2 individuals, according to this new report out, are the ones that committed the murders. The ones that committed the murders here. I want to share what exactly they did. News Nation has a report out, but it's interesting. And then the Twomblys, Cora and Cole Twombly, they appear to be lookouts, while Tifany Adams was the mastermind of this whole horrendous crime. Check it out.
It's horrifying, Ashley. You know, we've known for quite some time that this was brutal, that these were brutal killings. We had information. We reported that the women were not shot. It's not like they were shot in the head and it was painless. In fact, it was the opposite. And we now know the details that it was a personal, slow, long, drawn out killing. It's all in these new documents that were just released today. Paul Grice, we know, according to authorities, stabbed Veronica. You mentioned that he had that wound on his hand. We've been hearing about that for a while. We had pictures. He was at this Easter parade, and people in the community noticed that he had a wound on his hand. Well, it turns out there's a picture right there. It turns out that happened during this stabbing. Apparently, Veronica fought back. Again, it was brutal. Fought back hard enough that Paul Grice was hurt. So prosecutors say he stabbed Veronica. Tad Cullum, according to authorities, stabbed Jilian, and according to police, both of them, Paul and Tad, drove the bodies to the burial site. Now, you'll remember, Ash, I was at the burial site. We found it. It's in this very, very rural area behind a farm, hard to get to, hard to find. According to the investigators, they put the women inside a freezer. And they also took off their clothes and put their clothes inside the freezer and then buried it deep beneath the ground. You can see where I'm pointing the flashlight right there. That's where the bodies were buried. And what's interesting, we now know, is investigators, once they found the freezer, dug it up, tested the clothes, and they were able to match Paul and Tad's DNA back to the victim. So that's a new piece of evidence we didn't know about. As for Cole and Cora Twombly, we're told that they were the lookouts. Of course, we've known that Cora's teenage daughter spoke to police, gave police information about what happened. And then there's Grandma Tifany, who apparently was the mastermind behind this whole conspiracy. I keep hearing it over and over again from locals there. They say, if you watch Ozark and you know the character Darlene, they say Grandma Tifany is the Darlene, and these were all her little minions, and she told them what to do. And there was a new quote I want to read you from the documents today. It says, Tifany hated and despised Veronica Butler and wanted her dead. So they say she's the one who organized this whole thing, and now we know exactly how it all went down, Ashley.
I am going to be so fascinated to hear Tifany's son, the father of those kids who had those children with Veronica, what he's going to say, if anything, during these trials or trial, depending on if it gets severed at all, or if they even go to trial. One little detail here I want you to dig in, if you can. Cole and Cora Twombly had that 15-year-old daughter. And I think I read somewhere today that they roped her into this. The fact that they confided in their young teenage daughter what they had done was because they wanted her to provide an alibi. They literally were going to rope a child, if the prosecutors are right, into a horrifying double murder.
Cora Twombly, who confessed to her 15-year-old daughter and apparently told her everything. And the reason she was talking to her daughter, according to the prosecution, is because she wanted her daughter to help her come up with an alibi. Well, that all backfired because the daughter ended up talking to police, spilling the beans about it all. How that all went down, we don't know. Did they perhaps threaten her with some kind of charges, being an accessory? Is that how they got her to talk? We don't know, but she did the right thing, and she gave up all the goods.
Okay, so here's the big question. All these details, right? If the prosecutors are right, they've got these 5 people out there on the rural highway, stopping the car with Veronica and Jilian in it and pushing them off onto another road while the Twombleys allegedly stand guard and be lookouts. And then they've got these 2 guys doing the killing and presumably Tifany supervising. How do they know? I think my question here really is one of them talking and giving murder scene details? Because those 2 victims aren't telling how it happened. Who's giving the details?
It's a good question, and we don't know the answer exactly. I mean, early on in one of the first police reports that I got my hands on, it alluded to the fact that Grandma Tifany confessed, in a sense, gave some kind of information about where the bodies were, whether she's still talking, whether she just spoke that one time to police, we don't know. She bought these burner cell phones that we know are pivotal in the investigation, tracking the cell phones. That may be one of the ways that they figured out exactly where the bodies were buried. Because, again, it was the middle of nowhere. I mean, unless you had some kind of information, you would never know to go to the end of this long dirt road and start looking around behind this farm.
Yeah, my bet's on the Twombleys because they're the farthest away from the actual killing, if these facts are true. And my guess is they had a real come to Jesus moment as a God's misfit and thought, spill the beans, save yourselves, get the hell out of this horrible mess. I mean, Brian, it's just all so sad. And I don't even think we've heard the end of it. Thank you for providing the details tonight. Appreciate it.
Your theory might be right, by the way, because Cole Twombly is the one trying to separate his case, get out of the conspiracy. So maybe he's the one. Maybe he's the one talking.
News this afternoon, we now know how 2 Southwest Kansas mothers were murdered.
Their causes of death were released in a motion to consolidate the 5 suspects' preliminary hearings. Prosecutors say Paul Grice stabbed and killed Veronica Butler, and while doing so, he cut his hand badly. They say Grice threw the knife, his clothes, and stun gun in the burial site. Prosecutors allege his clothes have Butler's DNA on them.
Prosecutors also say Jilian Kelley was also stabbed, but by Tad Cullum. They allege Cullum drove Jilian and Veronica's bodies to a burial site that he dug a day before. Cullum is accused of burying the bodies inside of a freezer. His clothing found at the site also allegedly contained Jilian's DNA. Cora Twombly and Tifany Adams are asking a judge to separate their preliminary hearings from the other suspects. Attorneys for Cora filed a motion that says having the 5 prelims at the same time could lead to prejudice and says there will be a lot of evidence presented and it will be hard for a judge to separate which evidence is admissible against which defendant. The reasoning in Tifany Adams' motion is similar. Her attorneys say, quote, for any judge, no matter how mentally acute or diligent, the task of keeping the evidence in these 5 cases sorted out through a joint preliminary hearing is daunting, to say the least, end quote. And they also argue that since this is a potential capital case, it requires a heightened degree of reliability. The state wants to keep the prelims for Tifany, Tad, Paul, Cole, and Cora together. Prosecutors say the judge has the ability to determine which evidence is admissible to which defendant. They also say there will be no evidence favorable toward anyone and say, quote, they are all in it together, unable to implicate another without implicating oneself. A judge will decide whether to separate the preliminary hearings on Wednesday.
Rest in peace, Jilian Kelley and Veronica Butler. This shouldn't have ever happened, folks. They literally buried a freezer. Scary stuff, folks. Shocking details. I think the Twombleys are the weakest link here and probably will cooperate against the rest, since they didn't actually commit the murders. Do you think they would get a life sentence or the death penalty if they just served as a lookout? I see at least a 50-year piece for them. I see death penalty for mastermind number 1, which is Tifany Adams, the grandmother. And then Paul Grice, Tad Cullum, death penalty. what's so interesting about this whole case is Grice was the last person to get arrested in this case, and it seems like Grice has done the most damage of this case. It seems like he's done the most graphic of this case. Why did it take authorities so long to get Paul Grice? We've been covering this case extensively on JLR Investigates, and we'll continue to follow the process, praying for all the families affected in this terrible tragedy. It seems like the God's Misfits have been dismantled in the state of Oklahoma. Is there others out there, though? Is it a bigger network, or is this just a wannabe group of misfits that weren't living under God's terms? Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button. We've covered this case extensively. We've got a playlist, so check that out, and we will talk soon. JLR Investigates. Stay safe.